Good morning and welcome back to Morning Express. From matters, education and unions, let's shift gears to the newsroom and look at how the big stories have been covered in the past week. And joining us in studio this morning is Eric Latif. He's an online editor at the Capital FM. Also with us, and I should say drum rolls please, is Dr. Emphasis on the Dr. Nancy Booker. Congratulations.
Thank you, Sophie.
I was part of and managed to watch that auspicious occasion. Tell us a little bit before we go to introducing Gadara about what it is you graduated in.
I graduated with a PhD in communication, emphasis media studies, and yeah.
All right.
That's it. Yes.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Get him a coffee, gentlemen. Coffee, a kilo.
Thank you.
Yeah, she's also the chair, or rather the head of the Department of Journalism at the Multimedia University. Also with us is Patrick Gadara, who's a cartoonist, he's a blogger, he's a communications consultant, he's many things, and a media basher.
But not a doctor.
Yeah, clearly not a doctor. But thank you all for joining us, and good morning to you all. Let's start with, we just had Susion with us a few minutes ago, and we're talking about their big win yesterday in court, getting 50 to 60 increment. And this is a story we've covered over the years in terms of the strikes and their demands and all of that. And now the questions after they've gotten this particular ruling and the judge agreeing with them in that sense, the question is, where is this money going to come from? Eric, in your view, has this story been covered in terms of the real issues underneath and what this means for the country going forward?
I think before we even get to the real issues, it's there's a lot of confusion. There's a 50 to 60%. There's a this directly translates to about 15%. What is all this? I mean, what have they been awarded? What's the 2013? What's the 2011? What's 2001? What's been backdated? We need to actually get to understand what is it that the ordinary teacher has been pushing for, and how much has the ordinary teacher been awarded. Because many a times I get into these sort of arguments that we talk about billions, and they're asking for 100 million or I don't know how many billions. They've been awarded 50 to 60% pay rise. What is that? How much is that? Ask anyone, they'll not tell you.
So the media journalists have not in themselves understood what all of these figures translate to, what they mean, what now this means, and so cannot even then explain it to Kenyans.
Yes.
Which is sad.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Although I would say it's a little early to, to bash the journalists for not breaking it down just yet.
No,
because,
it's not early. 2001.
Yeah, but I mean the ruling, the increment, or rather the ruling just came out, yesterday, and now somebody then needs to break it down. But I like what Latif says. How does this translate? For the ordinary teacher, I think that's what we need to
I think the Standard is doing a little bit of translating over here. Latif, I don't know if you've had a moment to look at it. So, and this goes back to current salaries and P1, the various grades for the teachers. July 2012, you have that covered. 2013, and now with the proposals and what that translates to. So this is showing 16,000. You're moving up to 19. That's minimum, of course, working with 50%, and then takes you through all the way to 2016 and what that will mean. So I think in a sense this is breaking it down, although the source is Kenya National Union of Teachers. Yeah.
I think there's need for a lot more reporting on that particular subject, and getting to hear the voice of the teacher in that story would be important. Sure. And maybe that's what we need to be hearing in the next coming days. How does that translate to them? How is it going to make a difference in their lives? And talking about the challenges that they have faced over the years with very little pay, I think it would be interesting to see that unfold. Yeah.
And this also just exposes the challenges in the education sector, doesn't it, Gadara? Because on one hand, we're just talking with the Secretary General, and I was asking him about, yes, they're very vocal about teachers and their issues, but they're not the only players when you're talking education. There's the students, and you have issues of teacher-students ratio, you have issues of the curriculum. There's just so much that this is, yes, they're well remunerated, but they're still going back to 100 kids in one class.
Well, I'm not sure that they're well remunerated. That's that's going to be an issue, I think, that will need to be explored a bit further in terms of just how well off our
well, this would be better than
it's better than, but to call it, well, good remuneration, I think, is probably a stretch. I think on two things. First, we need to interrogate the ruling itself. You know, unfortunately, I mean, everybody is going to dash and pick out a headline, and everybody's going to concentrate on the fact that teachers' pay has gone up. But as Sosion was saying here, you know, there are other things in the ruling that speak to the role of the SRC that don't just apply to teachers. If the court rules that, as Sosion says, that the SRC cannot carry out job evaluation, that it's employers to do it, you know, that doesn't just apply to teachers. It applies to everywhere. Everybody else can say, well, don't evaluate me, you know, as stuff. So I think we need to go a bit deeper than simply regurgitating what the statements from the various players are, to looking at the source document, at the ruling itself. On the wider issue of education reform, I mean, Sosion hinted at the fact that teacher pupil ratios have ballooned since the introduction of FPE. You know, other things that he really needs to consider is the fact that studies have shown that up to 50% of the time teachers are not actually in class. You know, doing other stuff, not teaching. You know, and we really need to take a holistic view of the education sector and the problems that are there. They're not just limited to remuneration of teachers, and not just limited to, as the government would have us believe, to pupils not having computers. You know, there are much bigger systemic problems that are there that we need to be addressing. You know, and to be honest, some of the interventions that we have had, such as FPE, the whole idea, I think, of simply make it free and it will be good is problematic. You know, FPE is failing. You know, it's not delivering the quality of education that people want. In fact, even poor people are pulling out their kids from what is free schooling into private schooling. You know, and what we've now done is to export FPE from primary school to secondary school, and there's been talk of doing it at the university level. You know, if it's failing and they're not fixing why it's failing, all we'll do is export failure all across the
so
system.
Eric, we could do better as journalists, as the media, to really just tell the story of our education system, because I guess it's in understanding it and it being told well that then changes, you know, even where to begin, because as we are right now, we are now on salaries. The next big story will come and we'll forget about this.
Indeed, what I'm saying is I think we need to challenge ourselves in the newsrooms, because we have been, this is not every year there is a story about teachers and pay. Every year since Moi left, Kibaki came, Saitoti was education minister, or every year there has been a story. But we have never really come down to say, I mean, not many people will sit down and tell you that they have learned or they have gotten to understand, which is through the media, that this is the issue, that, you know, the teachers are basically saying, I earn 15,000 shillings, I get an allowance of X amount of money, I'd like this to go up, and the collective bargaining agreement now says that this shall move from A to B. We just know, oh, they've been given something, or it was not honored, they struck a boardroom deal with Saitoti, they struck a boardroom deal with Uhuru, you know, Uhuru has sorted out teachers. What exactly has happened? This translation of yesterday, we went with a bigger figure, 50 to 60%. 50 to 60% turns out is a backdated amount, but the actual translation is 13 to 15%. What is?
Yeah, but I think just to add on to that, I think we also need to be looking at what the agreement was in '97.
Yes. The CBA.
You know, yeah, because that's been one of the root causes, the failure to implement that. And how far along that have we gone? Have we surpassed it now, or are we behind? These are some of the things that are not canvassed in the coverage of this. And don't really buy the argument that it's going to come in the next few days. This is, as Clay says, a developing story, you know, and stuff. No, lots of these are things that the journalists who write these stories can access. Lots of these documents are already online, lots of commentaries on them already online. If they did a little bit of research, they could actually put together a cogent story about, how far we are along in our collective bargaining agreement. I think one of the failures that the media suffers from is it tends to portray the conflict, if you will, between teachers and government,
and between
and
unions.
not really discuss what the issues are. So it's more, the big headline is teachers have won. We're now going into a strike, apparently, of public workers, including teachers, over the new NHIF rates. But again, how well is that discussed? Let's look at context of it. The TSC has signed a deal with the Minet, to provide coverage for teachers. How does that affect all of this? So let's try and get a more holistic view, before we, when we are putting out these stories.
And just to add on to that, I don't know why that coverage hasn't been, in depth. Because most of the newsrooms have various journalists who just cover education.
Yeah.
It's one of the areas that, you constantly see certain names behind education stories. And so I think what we then need is that consistent coverage, because in terms of the expertise to do that, these are people who have done it for a long time. We see them when results are released. We saw them covering that head teachers conference the other day in Mombasa, and I'm sure they're the same ones whose bylines are going to be on the papers regarding this.
So they need
to be able to just sustain that. But I think what we also need is a comparison over the last couple of years. What has this pay increment done? How has it changed? The pay package for teachers, because part of that could be, the problems that we're having with education. Why is it that teachers are not spending time, 50% of their time they're spending outside of the classroom? And the problem,
So Sion will argue because they don't have enough money, so they're trying to make the money.
So they're trying to, make enough money. Could be, we don't know, and so that's why I think taking this through, I like how we usually do the budget. The coverage of the budget, that once it's been out there, it's all abstract. It's broken down. This is how it's going to translate to the life of a person who, lives, for example, in Kibera, or, that kind of thing. And you more or less like spend a day with this person, just trying to understand what this means. I wish we could see that, for the teacher. What does this mean? They have been going on strike. Why can't we have an end to these strikes? Why is it that every year there's a strike? And yet, every year, there is some agreement that is arrived at.
That ends the strike.
That ends the strike. There is some pay that is awarded, some increment that is awarded. How come this is not translating into anything tangible to get them off the streets and have them, into the classroom? You ask anybody, any student, pupil out there, what's their perception of their teachers? It's the strikes and the, the twigs and the placards and all that. I think we need to, even for the young people to appreciate that education. I think teachers also then need, to be appreciated, and whatever it is that needs to be done, then that needs to come out a lot more stronger.
Lupita Nyong'o, in the country, a long-awaited homecoming by many, including my co-host, Michael Gitonga, couldn't wait for Lupita to get here. But in terms of what has been said, in the media, we're covering her now that she's around, all the various things she's doing. Is there more that can be said? This is a person who was introduced to the world after winning her Oscars, but ahead of that, the Western media was obsessed with Lupita. Are we telling this story well?
Do we know the story?
What would be the story?
You see, that's the thing. So Lupita is home. Well, she's been coming, but this is the time that she's coming, and she's coming
official.
Properly, with the proper entourage and managers. And I hear it was a big of an issue yesterday at the Kempinski, because, there are people who are handling her. And all of a sudden, you actually come to realize that there's a Kenyan who's been handled by a Mzungu, and, the people who are handling her are no nonsense. And there's the way that they talk, there's the way that, when you want to talk to Lupita, there's how you approach her. And from what I hear, the people who were there yesterday were in a bit of a shock. But I think the Lupita story it's also a learning curve for the Kenyan media. Because, you know, we are used to dealing with socialites, huh? People who will actually call you to beg you to write about them on the Friday paper. And now here is somebody who is actually worthy of a mention in the paper. And the challenge here is what do I know about Lupita? What do I know about Lupita, the new Lupita, the global Lupita, not just the Lupita of sugar and, you know, doing local productions, but the Lupita, the Oscar-winning Lupita. It's a good experience. I think it's a very good thing that she's here. It's a very good thing that, you know, the media that went to get an opportunity to talk to her yesterday, experience what they got. I understand, you know, it was international media, and then you guys.
Oh, really?
Well, if I may weigh in on this.
Jeez. Eric, were you there?
If I may weigh in on this, I think, I mean, it's all fine and dandy that this big celebrity has come and stuff, you know.
Yeah, you're about to bash this one.
No, but I think my bigger thing is that this presents to me an opportunity to interrogate some of the issues on which she says she's now an ambassador. So for elephants, for example, you know, I think coverage of the entire poaching story has really been wanting, you know, and especially coverage of what our own government is doing, you know, about protecting elephants and stuff. Remember, they refused to declare it a national disaster, even when everybody and all the papers got together and ran the same editorial calling for this. Never happened. Your own, what's his name, Dennison's did a piece last year, essentially exposing the government is protecting poachers. It knows who they are and is protecting them. Again, all this has been sort of put under the carpet. You know, the stories of ivory in State House, you know, nobody asks about it, you know. So I think the fact that she's here and she is the face of, I think there was an unfortunate headline in the Nation saying that she's now been appointed to lead the fight to preserve the elephant, which is not true. She's simply the face of this fight, you know,
and for a particular
or an ambassador of it. Yeah,
there's already a
for a
campaign
particular
that's
organization that's
you
pushing
know.
a campaign. Yeah.
But I mean, one of the things with her being here that should give us is the opportunity to have this serious, comprehensive discussion about what our policy is, you know, about what our government is actually doing, you know, and how best we can actually protect our wildlife, not just it being an opportunity for hobnobbing with celebrity.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I listened to the interview that she did and, of course, her presentation. And I think for one, I mean, we get you know, celebrities pursuing various causes all the time. And oftentimes you just think it's something that they're passionate about and it's something that they want to be associated with. But I think listening to her yesterday, and especially on the economic consequences of poaching, I think that came out really clearly. You know, she broke it down and why we should then be able to protect you know, our wildlife from an economic point of view and what that would mean for the country. And I think for the first time, you know, I appreciated, you know, because every time the poaching story comes up, it's, you know, this is taking place, this amount of ivory has been recovered. It sounds like it's out there. You know, you feel sorry for the, you know, for the elephants, you know, and all that. But I think listening to her yesterday, you get the sense that this is something that needs a lot of concerted effort, and that it's going to be good for our economy. And this is why, you know, we should then be able to do this. And I think that's what we need to hear beyond just the glitz and the glamour of having her, you know, in Kenya. I think we need to move the conversation away from, you know, she's finally in town, you know, and all that, and what she's excited about. I mean, she talked about her excitement being in Kenya and the roads and all that. Now we need to move that conversation a notch higher to what her cause is actually championing and what this would mean.
It was good. One of the journalists showed that this is not just because every celeb would have a cause that they champion. That this is something she's been passionate about since she was 10.
Yeah.
I think you know, she talked about this. So
She did a poem on elephants.
Yeah.
But I think there's 2 tiers of coverage on Lupita Nyong'o. The
there
first
still
thing that
needs
we
to be there.
cannot ignore
Yeah.
is that our star is back home.
Yes.
That is a story. And there's a lot of story, I think, that should come out on Lupita, the star, coming back home, and how she can inspire others. Then we can now come back to the story of, the cause and the elephants. And
Break it down.
that's serious bit. Lupita Nyong'o is back home.
Yeah.
What is it about Lupita Nyong'o? I mean, we for example, we know Eric Wainaina went to Berkeley School of Music. He came back. He's very good in music. She went to study acting or theater, or whatever it's called. What is it that she went to study?
She was at
I
Yale.
mean, what were you taught? And from being taught that, how do you get into Hollywood? How do you actually get a big role in a big movie that wins awards, that you actually get to win? How do you choose the scripts? How are you given a script? Such stories are important even for the younger kids. Remember, this is the first time she's coming back. Everybody knows Lupita is a big star. Everybody is looking up to her and wondering, how can I be like Lupita? I think that's the first story.
Yeah.
Then we can talk about elephants.
Well, I think the fear is that the
You don't want us
the
to get
fluff,
lost.
if you will.
In the
The fluff tends to and it's the truth. It does tend to overwhelm the real serious discussion.
And it's the easier, perhaps, story sometimes to tell.
It is the easier story. It is the sexier story.
But
in a
important
sense.
story as well.
It
as
is
Erica
the
said.
human interest story.
Yeah.
In terms of its importance, I think it's very much kowtowing to the whole idea of celebrity, which for me has never carried too much weight. I think there is dangers that we need to be cognizant about when celebrities take up causes, in the sense that they tend to frame them in ways that are not necessarily reflective of what's on the ground, of what the problems on the ground actually are. I mean, we've seen this with Geldof and Live Aid, and Bono and the rest, with Madonna going to adopt kids in Malawi, this happens, and we need to be cognizant of it. That's why it's important to keep our eye on what the actual issues are when they take them up. So it's fine, go do the fluff stories, I don't have a problem with those. But the important things and the causes for which they claim to stand need to be interrogated, and we need to sit down and ask. In her entire speech yesterday, there was no mention, of government and of policy. Yet it's not going to be. I mean, that's what's going to stop elephants. It's when government decides poaching's got to stop, when it commits to stopping it, when it enacts policies, and not just PR. And unfortunately, we are being sucked into the PR game, and all we report is, some ivory was banned.
It will be a developing story. That will be tier 2 of this.
Tier 2
of this coverage will be, Lupita. This cause that she's taken up is not ending because she's come. Where she goes and wherever else she speaks, she's going to speak, and she's going to, how that organization is going to be trying to push the same agenda. We will get to that coverage of, what's happening, what's the elephant story, what's the poaching story.
This is why we should. But we haven't done it.
But the first thing that we want to do,
we're quite happy about
Lupita. Lupita is home.
Yes.
We cannot
that's the
ignore
story
that
you
fact.
want to do.
No, that's a story that we want to hear. That's a human interest story. If you put those 2 stories as individual clips and you put them online, you will see the one that gets more views
hits.
is the one that is Lupita
and again,
talking about.
which brings it to another.
Let's just say you're only on the second time of this story.
Again, I did not say you don't do the first one. And again, you shouldn't really, as media, simply kowtow to the audience or be chasing after eyeballs. You really need to decide what is important for your audience to hear.
I don't think we're disagreeing with what you're saying, Gadhar. I think he's saying just there are 2 sides to tell.
Yeah, no, I mean, that we're not...
then we are good. Then we are all in agreement.
We are all in agreement. And I think let's not be too hard on her. I mean, this is something that we have... I think the question...
It's not criticism of her at all.
The question that we should then be asking ourselves is what has government done to protect, the wildlife? And now that she has come in as an additional voice, I think that conversation then is going to be sustained. And we need to appreciate the fact that, you know, she has actually taken that up as a cause. I think going forward, the question would be, how does that then translate into the, you know, the realities of reducing the poaching of wildlife and championing, you know, for the cause of wildlife? That's where the conversation will be going. Again, not now. I think it's too early, you know, for us to start having that conversation. But I think for me, most importantly, the whole question of our stars and our local stars, at what point do we start recognizing them? And does it have to take a world platform, you know, for us to recognize these people and appreciate them and try and seek an identity with them? You know, that we now recognize them as Kenyans and they are one of us, and, you know, that's our star. What are we doing, even locally, to be able to do that? Must you get to that global arena before you can actually be appreciated by your own people? And for a young upcoming star, what does that mean? If they're acting in, you know, the local shows, for example, do we recognize them? Do we appreciate them for the role that they're doing? And I guess that then raises certain questions about our own
treatment of.
Yes, our own treatment of you know, of our local, not celebrities really, but our local stars.
Yes, I mean, I agree with what Nancy says to an extent. That there is another aspect of this, and that's the treatment of local artists. Where I would disagree is the idea that it is not time.
Not yet time. You say we talk about it now.
To talk about the elephants and stuff, because this is a conversation we should have been having, you know, ages ago. And her being
Dr. Richard Leakey. Dr. Richard Leakey is well renowned. Dr. Richard Leakey is big. I mean, he's huge. Dr. Richard Leakey has been talking about conservation for a long time. He's been chairman and director of KWS. He's back.
And remember what he said about government.
And they're doing a movie about him.
Would it be happening as it is now if there is no impunity for poachers? He said government is giving impunity for poachers. How many people have gone back and asked him after now he was appointed to run KWS, you know, all right, you were saying that then what has changed?
So let's tell that story as well. I want us to move on along to matters corruption. And, well, before this past week, we were talking about NYS a lot and the question of procurement as well. But the DPP appeared before Senate the other day, and one of the questions that was posed to him was whether it was against the rules of natural justice to first have the list of 175 released and made public. And I asked this question because then the media was that platform that was used to, you know, announce these are the cabinet secretaries, these are the individuals, 175. And in essence, what that has done is destroy the lives of some of these people. It's, you know, no matter whether they're cleared or whatever it is, damage pretty much has been done. And that was the argument that the senators were using across the political divide, even those in Jubilee. So, Eric, I'll put this to you. How does the media handle such a situation? The president has given this list to Parliament. We got access to it however way we did. But are we not party to then being the people that are
destroying people's lives?
Yes.
I think that's our role. Okay. Not to destroy people's lives, but to report. But to report. Wow. A name comes to mind, Dominic Strauss-Kahn. So, did he actually molest that lady in the hotel room? Did he get global coverage? You can't say until somebody has been proven, that's when you come to report. No. The fact of the matter is you're an investigation. If you're under investigation and a credible authority has told us that you're under investigation, we say that you're under investigation. So the media is not
if you've been, perpetuating a wrong.
And also, the president says, these people who are working in my government should step aside. Now, if, Sophia, you've been suspended by the Standard Group, and the Standard Group CEO goes out publicly to say that I am suspending Sophia, really? I'm just saying what the president said.
If I may, I think that, that's a bit too simplistic for my liking. I think we need to be querying the basis upon which lists such as this are generated. You know, we've seen majority of the guys on those lists are essentially not, I mean, there are no charges that are sustained against them. You know, we've seen also that the basis on which they were named, you know, onto the list, some of them was hearsay.
Somebody was overheard.
So we really need to ask, we really need to query whether this was a serious list where EAC, you know, what was the threshold for saying him and not him? You know, and I think very much that the media allows itself to be sort of used as a play toy by the, as a megaphone by the president, by the government, and by others.
Really?
You know, where it's not discussing issues. You know, it's they're trying to paint themselves as, you know, doing something about corruption, even when what they're doing is not necessarily helpful. You know, there is no querying. Media tends to report what government says as if it is actual fact, as if it is actual truth. You know, and there is little interrogation and verification when it comes to, okay, president has said this. Is this actually accurate? Is this the way we should be doing things? When he goes out and gives out that list, there was very little interrogation. Where is this list from? You know.
How do we knew where it was from?
The
Secretariat of the EACC.
How do people make it onto it? On what basis is it generated? Even within EAC, I mean EACC itself, we had people saying, well, we weren't aware that the president was given a list. You know.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think we shouldn't blame the media for reporting that, because the media was not the source of that list. You know, somebody was the source of the list, and I think the media credited the source of that particular list. I think going forward, in the immediate, it would be too hard on media to just bash them for, you know, for putting those names out, because they got the list from somebody. But you know, I like what he says, that maybe then after that, the questions about, you know, how are this list generated, what are the sources, are there investigations that are done, which would be...
has been done, hasn't it?
Yes, but not exhaustively.
That's why people are being cleared, because investigations are being done.
But I think, you know, in terms of how corruption has been covered, and just, you know, looking at it even with the NYS, you know, story, I think the coverage has more or less been politicized as compared to, you know, other things actually happening. What are the real issues? You know, did government lose money? Hasn't it lost money? You know, those are the conversations we should be having. But what we are seeing is the political divide. You know, we are hearing the voice of the opposition. We are hearing, I mean, certain figures within the opposition and certain figures within government. And what that does is that then the real issues then get lost in that. And I know politics sells, and it's good. I think one of the papers had a very interesting headline. Was it on Friday? Which was a little, you know, we could debate that, you know.
What was it?
Something about Raila, Uhuru, and Waiguru. And, you know, an interesting headline. I think somebody even talked about it on social media.
That he defends Waiguru?
No. I think it was very sensational. I forget the wording, but, you know, very sensational heading. And that then, you know, pushes the conversation away from the real issues concerning corruption, and focuses a lot more on the political personalities, and that way then, you know, the conversation gets lost. I think what we need to see is once such lists are out, or once, you know, some of these allegations have been brought forward, then that need to investigate, and the real issues about corruption, you know, need to come out. But I think the focus mostly has been on personalities and on the political voices around this, rather than the, you know, the substance.
Yeah. And in line with that, I'll ask you this, Gadara, as you respond. On NYS, I remember, I think it was last week that we had Bunjuri here, and he said the media was being used on that particular story that was pushing a certain agenda. So look at what happened the other day in Kisumu when the president was there and the former prime minister as well was there. So he had all along been, you know, hitting hard, going hard on this NYS issue. Him and the ODM and Court Brigade had even talked about it being a militia group, all of these allegations, that it is in fact infringing or interfering with with the work of county governments, that it is sort of taking a mandate in which it doesn't have. But there he was then next to the president saying that this is a good thing, this is the way to go. So again, is the media just, you know, being taken away by the politics and the sideshows of this and not interrogating the issues these people raise?
Well, I think, I mean, again, it will be reported, you know, Raila said this, and this is how, unfortunately, our media tends to operate. You know, it's simply a he said, she said sort of reporting without interrogating deeper. You know, the issues that they had raised prior about the NYS don't disappear. You know, simply because Raila stood up and said, "No, I support it." You know, we need to be asking, okay, what happened to those issues? You know, that you had raised, how have they been resolved? Have they been resolved at all? If they haven't, because that is where we matter. That's where we as a public, you know, should have our interests on those particular issues. You know, we saw NYS guys being mobilized to go have demonstrations that were quote unquote spontaneous, you know, which I highly doubt. You know, but again, the politicization of the NYS, you know, which is a paramilitary unit, you know, should cause us lots of concern. You know, should be asking, what are we actually doing? What's government actually doing with the NYS? You know, and what are the dangers that this poses to the rest of us? You know, coming back to what I'd said before, I just want to say something about the list to Parliament. You know, you would expect that when the president stands up in Parliament and says, I have 170 guys, 5 people who should step aside because they are being investigated, that there has been some prima facie case, you know, built against these guys, you know. It didn't happen, you know. So my thing is, when media is simply regurgitating what the politicians say, you know, and doesn't go beyond those headlines, you know, beyond those quotes, to find out what is the actual truth, to establish what is the actual truth about what they're talking, about what they're saying, then we're in big problems. All we'll end up doing is playing the political game, which they're quite happy doing, the politicians, and we'll never concentrate on what the real issues and the real problems we have are.
Eric, that was an epic case of he say, she said in terms of NOS coverage. It was this one says this one, then they turn around and then you're left looking funny as the media because you'd said it as though it was the substance of the issue.
It's unfortunate. I said this a couple of weeks back here, that corruption in this country will only be fought once the society decides to fight corruption. Before that, all of us, corruption is this thing, it's this tool that we use to either get wealth or get to power, and so the tool is just used all the time. So when you say, for example, a list is produced, and in this list there are names, and the president says, I have been told by the EACC that these people are under investigation, and I want them to step aside so that they can facilitate investigations, and the investigations happen and the people go back. Well, like that I say, we'll go back into the next phase of, so what kind of investigations, how is information being funneled to the EACC, and at what point does the EACC begin to act? Is it that if I receive a phone call that you are corrupt, I come and say, you will step aside because I need to investigate your office.
Which is what is happening now.
What happened.
Which is
that's in some cases that's what's happening. So we'll get to that level. I am the clay today. It's a developing story. However, the thing that I'd like to say about, you know, for example, the NYS saga. NYS saga, again, is politicians sit and they laugh and they skim up something and they say, you know, how am I going to hit you today, Sophia? I'm going to hit you using that cup. So how do I bring attention to that cup so that that cup moves and hits your head? And that's what's happening. Now, unfortunately, of course, the media picks it up, the media runs with it, unless, yes, I agree to some extent. When we, for example, have a headline that says, Raila clashes with the guru of Waiguru, that is, what's that?
That's the headline.
800 million, 800 million shillings. Somebody goes and logs into a system and somebody tries to move, and we are actually not trying to find out who's somebody. We're coming to say Waiguru, Raila, NYS, I'm the one who started it, you didn't start it, it's a good thing. Really?
Sensationalizing it all.
Yeah. And then for that depth then to be established, I think media houses that need to invest in investigative journalism, which is a costly endeavor for many news operations. For you to unearth some of those issues that we then need to hear concerning corruption, because I think what happens, and I like, I don't know whether I like Kenyans, but we forget really fast. Another corruption story will come up in a couple of weeks, and we'll forget about the previous ones. But when an investigation is done, look at some of the investigative reports that have been done. Look at the Garissa one that was done by Dennis Okari, and when it's an investigation, it has depth and it also has breadth, and we are able to keep that conversation going for a long time. And maybe that's what the direction that we need to go concerning corruption. Take one particular story and pursue it to its logical end, which would call for a lot of investment, from media houses on having that story investigated, and of course that then has cost implications.
Which also brings in the question of Mumias, and I remember you have asked time and again about this KPMG report that we as the media have written about, but where is this report? And it came back and who's got it? And Halala the other day was like, let this guy, step aside, and then there's apology or other.
What's his name? Kidero. That it's out in the public domain. Where is it? And this is one of my recurrent. In Kenya, we have this interesting thing where the media will report on studies or surveys or reports that have been released. Government today released this and that. But you don't actually get a copy of that. You don't actually see it. Where is it? And it makes it difficult for people to make up their own minds, on what these things actually say. So on the KPMG report, we are held hostage by what the interpretation of somebody else will be, because we don't get to see it. We don't get to actually read it and see, this is what it says about Kidero. So Kidero can stand up and say, well, we made profits throughout the time I was there. Is that what the report says? I don't know. I haven't seen the report. To believe other people, it doesn't say that. So until our media, I think, gets into the habit of actually informing.
But isn't the media that wrote about this and even quoted this report?
It's the media that quotes this report that doesn't show it to us.
It's the slant. Even when the media was reporting it, it's the slant. The slant was blame so-and-so. So that we...
So it was like an agenda.
Star reaction, and the reaction, it's a political
dimension.
I think my thing is, the media should move away from simply, quote-unquote, reporting what it is told, to actually informing. And these are two different things.
We shall say this for a very long time, that the media should.
Yeah, well,
the media will take a while. The media will take a while.
And there's one other thing, if I may, about what Eric said. He said corruption will only be fought when society decides to fight it. Actually, that's not true. Society, ask any Kenyan, few of them actually like corruption.
But we're all corrupt.
Remember, no, that's what we are told. Remember what happened in 2000? You
don't know that you will get out of trouble.
That's what Eric has just said. But actually, it's not true. If you look at what happened after Kibaki was elected, and the fact that people are going around arresting policemen, that in survey after survey that has been done since, that Kenyans rank corruption at the top of their list of concerns.
Because it's a nice thing to bash. It is not a nice thing to look at yourself.
A lot of the guys, this is, you guys suggest that corruption is being, that every Kenyan is looking to game the system. Actually, it's not true. Most corruption, and this has been shown in survey after survey, most corruption, even petty corruption, is actually extortion. It's government guys utilizing their position to steal from you, to force you to pay them.
Let's bring back the conversation. Okay.
Lots of it is not just, it's not people who are trying to get services that they're not entitled to. That's not
final point on that. We move on to another issue before we close.
Yeah, I think for me, the missing link, and this is going back to the Mumias story, the missing link in the coverage that we have seen regarding that has been, the place of the shareholder who has invested in Mumias over the last, when the shares were floated. Where are they, and what does this mean for them? And I think the concern, and this should be a business story. I don't think that that conversation has been sustained. I don't think the coverage has been, has had depth, because there are people who invested in Mumias. And now that, this has been happening, we don't hear what this portends for them. The other question is, where are the institutions that are supposed to be protecting the shareholders? The CMA, for example, we are yet to hear their voice, in this particular story. And so just besides the farmers and besides the fact that, they got a boost of 1 billion shillings, and all that, and of course the politicization of that particular story, what's the place of those people who invested, in the company? And what does this mean for them? Yeah.
Eric, let's end up on the not more than 2/3 gender rule, and the AG CIC been given 40 days by the court to sort this out. But this has been something that has been in place for a very long time. Some of them have had their meetings, whether they've agreed, not agreed, here we are. Are we breaking this down for Kenyans and the options that are being floated, and what this then going forward? Of course, then we'll see it after the 2017 elections in terms of what will be decided. But how is that story being told?
I'd say not very well. And this one actually, I'll need time. maybe another day. Because I'm actually very, very strong on this issue of, the gender rule. We have had a constitution since 2010. It talked about this, and we have agreed. We voted for the constitution. Well, there are those that didn't vote for it. We have it here with us. We need to actually think about how do we actualize our wishes and our desires. We have kept quiet about this issue for a long time. We're coming to talk about it now. And even now when you're talking about it, the court has told the agencies that are responsible, sort this thing out within 40 days. We have very many proposals that have been thrown left, right, and center. The Devolution Ministry has a proposal. The AG has a proposal. The CIC has a proposal. The women parliamentarians have a proposal. What are these proposals? And what do these proposals mean? We are starting to take another political dimension on this proposal, but starting to say, no, if we have women who are nominated, the women will not bring any sense to parliament. If we have women who are elected, how can we? We're starting now to fight, which is unfortunate. I think that conversation, we cannot run away from that conversation. We must have that conversation, even if we eventually say that the only way to do this thing is go back to the constitution and repeal that clause. We must have that conversation, and that conversation must be held with a lot of sobriety.
Yeah, and the courts are now forcing us to have it faster.
Yes, the courts are forcing us to have it faster. And I think the kind of coverage or the kind of conversations that have been taking place around that have been politicized. And, looking at the politics of gender, I think that has been the main, the minefield that that people have taken, and that's the kind of coverage that we have seen. What is expected is an interrogation of that, and what that means. What are the various institutions that have been put in place to implement this, and the fact that a number of them, I think, are just having their terms extended so that they can allow, that some of these things can be actualized. What does that mean? And when their terms expire and some of this have not been achieved, then what does that mean? For example, Parliament then would be unconstitutional because the representation is not properly constituted, and somebody can go to court, and they would have a very strong case, to that effect. I think we need to move away from the politics of gender and focus on the issues. But more importantly, looking at gender issues, looking at how media has covered that, not just even with this particular story. I think there was a newspaper that carried a headline about alarm as girls, I think.
And the Chancellor raised it at the graduation.
The Chancellor raised it at the graduation as well. And why is it an alarm, when women outdo, and, have they outdone or have they just caught up, with men? That's the politicization of gender issues, and when we go that way, then we lose, we lose the proper conversation. I think we really need to look at it with a lot of sobriety, so that we are then also covering it from a very sober,
and from understanding what our past and history is and where we are.
But then again, that that we shouldn't you know, lighten the conversation and just have, you know, when you have some of those constitutional provisions, they have a time frame, you know, and within that time frame, other than just ensuring that that is implemented, outside of that, what is it that is being done to ensure that going forward, you know, that gender is represented? How, you know, are women being empowered, you know, to the effect that they can actually now be able to campaign, for example, and seek elective offices without necessarily having to be nominated? You know, what is it that is taking place outside of that, you know, to ensure that after these constitutional provisions have expired, that we can then have that one, you know, equal representation, so to speak.
Okay, finally.
I think on the issue of the 2/3 thing, we need to be more cognizant of what the issues themselves are. I think we should be asking, why is it difficult to pass that law, you know, or to have Parliament essentially effect what's in the Constitution? Initially, they had argued that it was an issue of cost, but we understand that surely it is not an issue of cost. You know, so what actually is it? You know, and it seems to me it's very much simply a reluctance, you know, by those who have power, you know, to allow others into their club. And I think we need to become more serious when we're reporting this, that we elevate the discussion and we put a spotlight on what the actual reasons for constitutional provisions are not being fulfilled are. I think we also need to look beyond the National Assembly to start asking what's happening in county assemblies. They are not exempt from this. They're also supposed to be having their 1/3 gender thing.
But theirs is sorted.
You know, so the question is, what's happening there? You know, do we have that? And then we also need to recognize that this is just a minimum, the 1/3.
I know it's not,
You know, it is not the goal, you know. And I'll say one final thing, and I've said it here before. It is not a women's issue. You know, we need to be clear that when we have more women in positions of power, in positions of influence, positions of authority, the whole society benefits. So it's not just something for women to fight for, but for everybody in society.
That's a good way to wind it up, because largely also our coverage sometimes has been, you know, against the others, women against the men. So thank you, ladies, gentlemen, for joining us. Patrick Gadara, communications consultant, Dr. Nancy Booker, who's head of the journalism department at the Multimedia University, and Eric Latif, who is an online editor at the Capital FM. Thank you for watching, and don't go away. Stay right there, because Michael Gitonga wants to help you deal with your baggage and people who might come into your life with a lot of baggage. Yep, sometimes you're even not able to identify it, so he'll tell you how the telltale signs. He and Chris Hart, who's our relationships expert. Stay with us.